So programs that are available to landowners, there's several of them, and I'll go into more detail on a couple of these later on. But timberland liability, that's essentially vacant landowner liability or liability for timber landowners. You don't necessarily have to have timber on the property, but it's vacant land liability. Hunt club liability, that is for landowners who lease their property to hunting clubs. Recreational liability, we did several years ago, we had one of our corporate landowners come to us and they wanted to lease their land not to a hunting club, but they had specific exposures. They had properties that were located near residential areas, so they didn't want people there hunting. So they wanted to generate revenue off that property, so they were leasing to ATV clubs and horseback clubs, things like that. So we came up with a policy developed specifically for those types of exposures, and we just call it recreational liability. Standing timber insurance, you can insure your trees, property coverage for your trees if you want to. Prescribed burning coverage, if you do prescribed burns on your property. Consulting forester coverage, we do consulting foresters and consulting wildlife biologists. Many times that's who you're going to use to do your burning as opposed to doing it yourself, but there is a product if you want to do your own burns. And then one thing that's not up here is guides and outfitters coverage. A lot of landowners don't necessarily lease their property, but they do operate some type of lodge, and they let people come in and pay to use the facilities. They offer guide services, things like that. So that's a different type of exposure than hunting lease liability. Now, in 1995, there was a pretty well recognized study that was done by Hill and Kaiser. It was a nationwide assessment for rural landowner liability. 3 significant points came out of this study. Number one, the threat to landowners is probably exaggerated. So I'm going to tell you about experiences we've had, experiences that we've read about that occur to landowners that involve lawsuits, and it's not a scare tactic. The chance of something happening to you is probably not that great, but it does happen. Always be familiar with your state laws. Every state is different. I live in Tennessee. We just passed a new law there that gives further protections to landowners. So keep up with what your state laws are doing. In Tennessee, they have now shifted the burden on trespassers to the trespasser. Used to, the landowner was responsible for certain postings within certain distances, and it was their responsibility to make sure that trespassers knew they were coming on to posted property. Well, now they've shifted that burden to the trespasser to know that they're on someone else's land. And then lastly, incorporate safety and risk management. Those are 2 different disciplines, but the risk management essentially means transfer your risk, meaning buy insurance. You want to transfer that exposure to somebody else, so most people transfer that risk to an insurance company. Now, all insurance is based on the concept of negligence. Negligence, a landowner has a duty to protect and warn any visitors or users of their property. So anybody who comes on their property, you have a duty to warn them of any hazards. A careless breach occurs when a landowner fails in that duty. If there's a connection between the duty owed and the breach, you're going to end up with damages, which ultimately is going to lead to a settlement. Now, landowners that take money for activities on their property have what we call the highest duty of care. So if you receive money, you have a greater responsibility to those people that come and use your property to inspect and warn them of any hazards, both on and off the property. Now, if you lease your land, the inspections, you should always do inspections, have annual inspections. It's a good idea for you to do it, but it's also a good idea to require whomever you lease that property to do an inspection as well. You should have a regular schedule. You should warn any of these club members or users of your property of any hazards or changes. We've had situations where people will lease to a hunting club, and they're only active on certain times of the year on the property, and the landowner's gone in and put up new gates or dug ditches. Big problem we have is when they've gone in and dug ditches, and then the guy comes along on an ATV where he's ridden down this same area before, time and time again, and he hits that ditch and gets seriously injured or killed. Most times they get killed. So You know, you always want to let them know of any changes to the property. The landowner and the club members should also inspect tree stands, gates, and other hazards. This should always be done in writing. Once again, if you make a change to the property, you should probably notify the club in writing. You want to document. What I recommend is that people form a checklist, and then that way you initially establish all the hazards on the property, and then you go back and you inspect those hazards routinely every year. So a checklist is a great thing to use. I think the clubs need to have a checklist, especially where they address the different tree stands and the condition that those stands are in. There's three types of people that you will have on your property. In the eyes of the insurance and the eyes of the law, there's three types of people. Invitees, those are people who pay to come on the property. Once again, you have the highest duty of care for those individuals. Licensees, those are people that are guests or visitors to your property, whether it's to hunt or to do other things, ride ATVs, go fishing in the pond, whatever. Some states do not see a great difference in invitees and licensees. And then trespassers. You have little to no duty of care to a trespasser. This says new category, known trespasser. Known trespassers, actually, that category's been around for a while. That's if you have trespassers on your property that are on there with regularity, you know about it, you don't take steps to stop or prevent them from being on your property, you assume liability for those individuals. It's just as though they are a guest. So you need to document and show that you've taken steps. You've called the sheriff, you've talked to them, done whatever, but you need to show that you've taken steps to prevent them from coming onto the property. One thing you cannot do is set a trap. You can't. I've had a friend who did it. You can't set traps. I had one fella who said, "Yeah, I found out where they were coming in on their ATVs, and I strung a bunch of barbed wire." You know, you cannot do that. You will get in big trouble. There's a landmark case that occurred with a known trespasser, and you can find a lot of this stuff online. You can go do searches and find this information. And we read up to see what kind of case law there is and how the things have been settled out. But there was one situation that occurred, and I believe it was the New Jersey Transit Authority that was sued, and they had a section of subway track where it came up, and people could access it to get across the tracks. And they crossed it with regularity, and they didn't do anything to stop these folks. They were always crossing the tracks. There was a shortcut, otherwise they had to walk several blocks around. There was a gentleman one evening that stopped to relieve himself on the tracks, and there's an electrified line on those tracks. And he hit that line, and he was killed. And his widow sued the transit authority, and she won. She got a big settlement. It was in the millions of dollars. Now, I know they appealed it, and I don't know what the end result was, but that was an example of a known trespasser. You know, they said you knew everybody was going through here and using this area. You didn't do anything to stop it. My husband's now dead because you didn't take steps to prevent access to that area. Typically, you know, a trespasser has no rights. There are certain things, you know, an attractive nuisance, things like that. Where we typically see settlements and substantial settlements involving trespassers are when children are involved. If you get a kid trespassing on your property and he's on an ATV or something like that, and he gets injured, then there's a good chance you're going to pay. Now, an invitee or a licensee, essentially somebody who pays or a guest that comes on your property, you need to inspect the property, like we said, for hidden dangers, both on and off the property. You know, old well sites, things like that. If there's an old home site, there's probably a well there. You need to make sure where that is. You need to notify people of that. But when I say both on and off the property, there was a landmark case that occurred in Pennsylvania where a gentleman let a friend, this was a case of a licensee, a guest, he let a friend come on his property and hunt. This friend shot at a deer, missed, the bullet went off the property, went through a house and killed a woman. There was clearly a negligent act was committed. They sued both the shooter and the landowner because he allowed this person to come on his property and hunt. The court ruled that the shooter was 90% negligent, but that the landowner was 10% negligent. So the landowner had to pay 10% of that claim. So once again, the landowner should warn people that come on his property, hey, there's houses over here, there's these different exposures both on and off the property. Most people now, you can go to Google or wherever and download these aerial photographs. I see most hunt clubs will have an aerial photograph, and they mark all the hazards and the property lines and the different hazards off the property that they need to be aware of. So either remove the hazard or give adequate warning of their presence. Now, recreational use statutes, I'm not going to say much about that because that's going to be discussed later, but essentially states offer protections for landowners that let their land be available to the public for use. These things are, we see a lot of people try to get the cases thrown out where they're being sued under the recreational use statute, and a lot of times it doesn't work. You have to, it's not just letting your land be available to the public, but you have to, it's different in every state. They have to advertise it, make sure everybody knows. There was one incident that occurred where somebody had some friends over sledding on the property, and the woman got injured slipping on some icy steps and sued their friends. And they tried to get it thrown out based on the recreational immunity statute. They said no. They were invited guests. You didn't make your property open to the public. There was another case that occurred where a fellow had a small lake. He had a dock on that lake, and everybody knew they could use that property. Everybody in town, small community, swam out there. Well, somebody went out there and dove off that dock, and the water was probably 3 feet deep, and broke his neck and was paralyzed. And they tried to get it thrown out because they made that swimming area open to the public. But what they said was they should have had a no diving sign on the dock. They still had a duty, even though they made it open to the public, they still had a duty to warn people of the hazards. So I don't know what the settlement was on that. Wisconsin has some pretty liberal laws, but we're in Arkansas, so that doesn't matter. Wisconsin will allow you to take up to a certain amount of money and still protect you under the recreational immunity statutes. But like I said, every state's different. Now, if you lease your land to a hunting club, always make sure that you have a written hunting lease. There are some examples of that in the information that you've been given on that CD and in the booklet of hunting leases. A hunting lease should always have some type of hold harmless clause or an indemnity waiver. It should clearly outline the responsibilities of the landowner and the club. Once again, what I mentioned earlier, you should always have a map of the property detailing the hazards, whether it be gates, the property boundaries, adjacent landowners' houses, things like that. Always require insurance. Require that hunting club to buy insurance. It doesn't cost much. They need to buy it. They need to name the landowner as an additional insured. Otherwise, the landowner can be named separately in a suit. Always make sure that they're named, because this insurance is for the club. It's not for the landowner. So the landowner needs to be named as the additional insured. I always recommend that a club have a check-in area where they come in so they know who's on the property and who's not on the property. That helps reduce the number of shootings that we have. But always, that way they know who's there and where they're hunting. So most people have a check-in area going in, and then they check out when they leave. Pay particular attention to gates and other hazards. We have a real problem with people running into gates with ATVs. If you have any cable or chain gates on your property, I would encourage you to take them down. But what some people do that have chains or cables is they will take a big piece of PVC pipe and put it on that cable or that chain, and they will put reflective tape on it. We've had people hit the post. So I recommend that they keep the post clear of grass and debris and have reflective tape on the post and have it well marked. But we have a real problem with chains and cables. Now, hunting lease, I was going to talk about a couple of the coverages more specifically. Hunting lease liability is one of the big products that we have, and that is general liability for hunting clubs leasing land. So it is the club is the named insured. It is designed for occurrences arising out of the activities and operations of a hunting club on leased property. So once again, that's policies for the club. a couple of things. Not all these policies are the same. When you read an insurance policy, what you really need to do is just go to the exclusions and read the exclusions, and that's where that's the fine print that you need to look for. The way insurance policies read, pretty much everything is covered unless it's excluded. So look at the exclusions. So, you know, these products are out there, but they're not all the same. It's not apples for apples. Most people think, well, I buy insurance, it gives me $1 million worth of coverage, I'm covered. That's not true. Always make sure that member-to-member coverage is offered. Our biggest claims are member-to-member claims. That's where one member shoots another member. They are not our most frequent claims, but they are typically our most severe claims. Always be sure that they offer guest liability. Now that is not, and that's where the wording can get a little gray. Your policy is for guests. It covers guests. The hunt club. If a hunt club invites a guest on the property and they get injured, that's what that policy is for. But what will it cover if a guest commits the negligent act? What if a guest shoots somebody? Is there coverage on that policy? You need to make sure that it covers not only guest liability if the guest gets injured, but what if the guest commits the negligent act? We've seen some policies that have certain exclusions. It'll say there's member-to-member coverage here, but then you read the exclusions and they might exclude directors and officers. Well, then if it's a small club and everybody's voting member, that means there's no member-to-member coverage. So just, you got to be aware of these things. Additional insured status available for the property owner. Make sure that you are named as an additional insured on these policies. Typically it's like a minimal charge, $25, $26 on most policies, but that protects the landowners. So if they commit the negligent act, the club does, they're going to sue both the club and the landowner, but the landowner's protected under that policy. Now, timberland liability insurance, that is just general liability for owners of timberland or any other land. Many times, this coverage can be provided through your homeowner's policy or other such policies. But what you will see is, depending on how many acres you have, those homeowner policies will have limitations. Sometimes they won't cover the incidental hunting exposure that you might have on your property or ATV use. There might be certain things on those policies that are not going to be covered. So you need to check with your agent and make sure you're properly covered if in fact you want to go that route as opposed to buying a separate policy. Most of these policies only cost about $150. They offer $1 million per occurrence with a $2 million aggregate. That's pretty industry standard on these policies. So what some people do is they might have coverage here, but then they'll go ahead and buy for $150 this other policy just to give them an excess layer of another $1 million of coverage in case they have a bad event that occurs. You know, these policies, this timberland liability policy, does cover incidental hunting exposure. So it is going to pick up hunting exposure of friends, guests, family members, visitors. So if they commit a negligent act, that Pennsylvania shooting I referred to, that would have been covered under this policy. It protects you from claims from trespassers and visitors. So, you know, if you have a trespasser sue you, chances that they're going to win are not great, but you still have to hire a lawyer and go out and fight it. So this policy is going to pay for your legal fees, it's going to protect you, and it's going to pay if there's a settlement awarded by the court, it's going to pay that. Same thing with visitors, like the woman who was injured sledding. This policy would have defended that, and it would have paid had a settlement been offered. Just a little bit about claims, the type of things that we see and we experience in our business. The most frequent claims we have are tree stand. Now, there's not always negligence involved in tree stand claims. If someone falls out of their stand, that's not a covered claim. This isn't an accident policy, it's a liability policy. There has to be negligence. Now, you put somebody in a bad stand or don't offer them a safety harness or things like that, and it's your stand, and they come on your property, well, that's a different deal. There's going to be some negligence because you put them in a bad stand that collapsed, or you didn't offer them sufficient protection as far as fall protection to keep them from falling out of that stand. But so we have, those are our highest frequency, but typically there's no negligence involved. Most policies carry something called med pay or medical payments. It's a good faith payment. It doesn't assume any negligence, but it helps with emergency room bills. The med pay ranges anywhere from like $1,000 to $5,000. So we see, a lot of med pay claims on this type of accident, but not necessarily a lot of negligent claims. Second, but also very high frequency, are ATV claims. They're always very bad. We get a lot of ATV claims. Gates are a big problem. We recently had a claim where someone was riding down the road right in front of the Hunt Club house. It was a Hunt Club president. He's gone down that road many times and hit a pothole and was killed. Flipped his ATV and was killed. And, once again, there's got to be some negligence on somebody's part. Or, it's one of those things where there was none. Shootings are our lowest frequency, but our highest severity. Those are always nasty claims. We've never seen a shooting claim that made sense. Typically, the shooting claims occur at dusk and dawn, and almost always it involves someone breaking a plane. Someone coming up out of a bottom, someone coming into a field, someone coming into, into a roadway, but someone breaking a plane from the woods into an open area, or coming over a rise. Those are usually when we see our shootings. Someone probably hears them coming, they get excited, and as soon as they appear, they pull the trigger. And those are almost always member-to-member claims. Other types of claims we see, involve trespassers, just crazy carelessness. We had one claim that occurred where a gentleman was deer hunting. It was cold. He didn't really want to get out there and work very hard, so he was hunting out of his pickup truck, and there was an area that had a lot of visibility right to left because it was railroad tracks, so he kind of eased up on the tracks and was, figured he could get a good shot going either way, and he had a few whiskey drinks and relaxed and dozed off. Of course, y'all know what happened next. Train came, and train hit him, hit the truck. And now, who do you think was the claimant on that? Who was the negligent party, and who received the damages and the settlement? Railroad. The negligent party was the club. The club member went up on the tracks, left the vehicle there, the train hit it, so the railroad company was the claimant in that case, and justifiably so. The biggest claim, the biggest settlement we've ever seen happened in another state, and it involved a trespasser. And all states are different. Once again, I've been told this would have never happened in some other states, that this claim would have never been paid, but it involved a trespasser. What had happened, it was on a big corporate landowner, and this corporate landowner owned, had leased this property to a hunting club, and part of the property came to a point, and within that point there was a local swimming hole. And in the summertime, when the club was not active on the property, trespassers would come in, they'd tear down their gate, they would tear down their no trespassing signs, and they'd go swimming in this swimming hole. They did this to the point that the club got tired of replacing the gate and replacing the signs, or repairing the gate and replacing the signs, so they moved the gate back and they moved the no trespassing signs back just to allow them access to that swimming hole. And y'all know the story, the fellow's been drinking, he gets up in the tree, watch this, and he dives out of the tree in 6 inches of water and he breaks his neck. So now he's quadriplegic. And drunk, trespassing, breaks his own neck, and this claim went in excess of $1 million. That's why most of these corporate landowners carry umbrella policies on top of the standard policies under the club to cover such catastrophic events. But what their argument was, what the claimant's argument was, they said there was implied consent because they had moved the signs and moved the gate. Had they left it there and he'd done that, chances are they would not have had a case, but because they had moved everything, that was implied consent, and so they paid a pretty substantial amount of money. Biggest settlement we've seen, like I said. And that's all I have. Does anybody have any questions?
You said the average policy was about $150 for a landowner.
Yeah. And typically those are going to carry membership dues. You know, we do, and other companies do this as well. They have master policies. If you buy an individual policy, it's going to cost considerably more. The advantage of an individual policy is you can put an umbrella on top of it. We can't do umbrellas on top of master policies. And the way the master policy works, and we have a program with the Arkansas Forestry Association, and I've got some information over there on the table about that, but you have to be a member of the association. So we have a master policy. Each certificate holder under that policy gets their own limit of liability. So although you are on a master policy, you still, as a certificate holder, you carry your own $1 million, $2 million limit of liability. And you can buy both the timberland liability policy, you can buy the hunt lease liability policy, or you can buy a combination. There's a combo policy that incorporates both of those coverages. Once again, that limits you though to one set of 1 million, 2 million, whereas some people say, you know what, I'll let the club buy theirs and I'll buy mine. That gives me two separate limits of liability, whereas instead of $1 million, $2 million limit. But those are available, and like I said, there's some information back there. My business cards are back there. If you have any questions, you can feel free to call me.
So would you recommend, if you own land, timberland, I inherited timberland, my brother and I did, and we have one hunting club that has a policy, but you know, I don't know that I've ever read the policy, so I need to read the policy.
You need to make sure you're a certificate holder, and you need to see what's covered, and you need to see what the exclusions are on the policy. And you can tell them where you want. I mean, they can bring you a certificate and say, you know what, I'm not comfortable with this. You need to. This is what I want you to have.
Well, for my remaining land, do you think I should increase my homeowners then to cover anything? Because I don't live near that land. I'm an absentee landowner.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can buy one of these, just the timberland liability policy, or you can talk to your homeowners and see if they will. What I do on my homeowners is I have an umbrella policy. Now, I don't have any land, but I carry max limits, the maximum limits I can carry on my homeowner's policy, and then I have $1 million umbrella on top of that. So I have $1.5 million coverage, whether it's a vehicle accident, a homeowner's accident, and it's all liability. Or boat, I have a duck hunting boat, so I've got, it covers the boat, home, and gives me that extra coverage in case something bad happens. So if you do that, I would encourage you to get an umbrella, because umbrella for a homeowner's policy is under $200.
Okay. And you mentioned that you insured horseback riding. Are there any other recreational type things besides hunting, fishing? I do agritourism work in Louisiana, and some people are finding it difficult to get insurance. One person was denied coverage because they had a wagon as part of their enterprise, and that's pretty typical of an agritourism operation. They're going to have a wagon.
It shouldn't be a problem.
Okay.
We've got a program with the Louisiana Forestry Association as well. But we craft policies in a lot of cases specific to those needs. I've done several recently for some states. Did one for Illinois for some things that they were doing to promote use on landowners, and the landowners wanted certain protections, so we crafted a special policy for the state. I've done it for some municipalities in Missouri recently where they had certain things going on, and the municipality was concerned about getting sued. So it can be done. It's just, are you willing to find someone who wants to go the extra mile to do that kind of work and put something together for them? All right, that's all I have.